Sure, Sellar. This is Super Audio Mastering. Basically, we've got a wealth of really amazing analog gear here. Our general signal path would put the TC electronic at the start, which we would use for things like problematic frequencies, resonances, surgical EQ. And then it will be passed to one of our D2As, which are actually sitting at the back here. These are our A to Ds. We've got three to choose from, 3 D2As and 3 A to Ds. And they all have slightly different characters, even though they're the same unit. They are running different firmwares from updates when they've been fixed. Then we've got once we're in the analog world, usually the Avalon sits at the front where we make our broad sweep sort of EQ changes. That generally then runs into the MTC where we will do our level adjustments with twin-com compressor here, which we use mostly for coloration these days. We also have our Maslek MEA2, which sits on insert 1 on our MTC and can be used as a mid-side EQ, which would set this as your mid EQ and then this side is your side, which is great for kind of bringing sort of vocal presence or attenuating vocal presence if necessary. We then have our Phoenix compressor, which we use sparingly, usually, if at all. Again, really great for coloration. It's got some really lovely tubes, vacuum tubes in there. Then that would go to our limiter before the conversion back to digital, just to make sure we're not clipping on our analog to digital converters. And then that will come back into our pyramid system here, where everything is recorded and we do our editing and cutting together of the final masters.
I went from being a recording engineer to becoming a mastering engineer, but I was always interested in disc cutting and how stuff translated and went to disc. So the very process of that was, really valuable. But what I learned during that period was that the mixes, everybody worked really, really hard to make the 5 track per side of the album, whatever it was, 5 or 6 tracks, all hang together and sound absolutely great before it went to the cutting room. So, because the cutting process was a linear process and you did track 1 and track 2 and so on, and then you leapfrogged with your equipment because you had 2 lots of EQ and 2 lots of compressors or limiters or whatever, and you had to do the settings, but we never had to do that much. There was never a huge amount to do in the process of cutting a record. It was always the mixing engineers and who would do a playback of the final album. And that's kind of what we did, and you went, oh, well, I think track 2 is going to need to come up by half a dB. We can do that in the cut. But if it was something like, actually, we need to remix this because there's something a little bit wrong with it, we wouldn't say we'll fix it in the cut, because you couldn't. We wanted to get it as near as damn it right. So we would go back in and recall everything and remix it so that it sat in the record exactly as we wanted it. So that when we went to the cutting room, there was really only small things to do. And where you had difficult projects, then yeah, you may have to do more EQ in the cutting room. There are a group of people who I did cut records with. They were just really fascinating. I suppose what really fascinated me was how much better it sounded coming off vinyl, and it more sounded like kind of how I imagined it to be, and that was really interesting. But I loved that final polishing. So when I decided to join Bernie and Avi at Chop 'Em Out, and we built this kind of empire of remastering and so on, I was quite close to the guys at the Townhouse, and we were all rivals, but we all got on well, and we were all doing similar things and so on. So my influences were many.
So you've got
TDLs.
yes, So
transmission line.
yeah,
Yeah.
So those guys, the TDLs, I mean, they're rare.
Yes, they are rare.
Um,
I've got 2 pairs of them for 4 speakers. Yeah, and yeah, they're more hi-fi kind of thing, but they are. But we've just refurbished one of the sets, and it's quite interesting. They're probably more like they were when they were new. So these things do wear, but the Dunleavys, we tried them in here, but it needs probably a lot of work acoustically, and I probably need to move the console. And as much as it would be lovely, we've probably got to spend 15 grand on acoustics work and other stuff, and power amps and things like that. So it all gets very expensive, and it doesn't really stack up economically these days to do that.
yeah, because they've got so much bottom end to.
Yeah, exactly. And you need to control that and throw it in the right direction and make sure that it works in your space. And the biggest problem people have with those is that it's important. We should have a big room. This room's capable of dealing with it, but it needs a lot of control. I mean, they're fab. But actually, we make, despite, records sound better outside than perhaps they sound good in here, but they sound better, when the client takes them home, they will sound better. So, they're better than they thought, or whatever, and they're more tighter and more concise, or something like that. So I do, and I have various speakers, but we keep coming back, and then I have these M&Ks, which are made in America M&Ks, not Chinese units. These original M&Ks, and they're actually really fast. As somebody said to me once, the waterfall plot of the M&K is very similar to the Oritone. That came from an acoustician, and we looked at the waterfall plot, and it's really, really close. It's quite fascinating, actually. The original Oritone was a great speaker. Everybody used to mix on them. I think people still do, if I'm not mistaken. But the M&K is really good for surround. We do use it for stereo, but kind of for checking against other stuff. So the M&K surround system is really is. You need to drive them, and you need to kind of use the room as a sort of fine balance where the room actually starts working correctly with 5 M&Ks and the sub and so on. And it starts to sound absolutely fantastic. You start to really feel like you're in it. I came up with the idea of actually converting this roundhouse into a mastering room. And the main reason was because it's got this huge front wall, which is kind of what you want, really. So to get really good stereo imaging, I thought, that could work. So with the speakers, transmission line speakers off the wall by about 1 meter, and it's kind of worked. And so I thought we could convert that. So we put a floating floor in, and with underfloor heating as well, and then acoustic treatment in the roof, lots of it, and I was then able to kind of hit the ground running, really, and start off with all my clients who I had felt that I was sort of neglecting because I was looking after people and managing people and managing facilities and not doing enough of what I really liked doing, which was this, mastering music. So, and playing with tape. And of course, in those days, we played with a lot of tape. So I essentially just, opened the doors. While I was working in Belgium, I had people wiring in here, and we were, building this facility. I wanted it to be surround stereo, as world class as I could make it at the time, and that's quite a long time ago now. but it seems to hang together, and it was set up as surround with both DSD capability, direct stream digital for Super Audio CD, and also I was doing surround work for DVD-A and DTS and so on and so forth. So, and then along came a lot of projects for Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Depeche Mode, and I helped all these companies to realize their ambitions to repurpose these fantastic catalogues of music in surround and stereo, and sort of help Mute, for example, in relation to Depeche Mode and Nick Cave, to set up a mixing facility in their offices, in their own studio, so we could keep the budgets under control and it didn't cost fortunes, and we could actually make these projects happen. And that's how I came to be here, and then it's really kind of gone from there. So why do people come back here? Well, people come back, I think, because we like music, and we like to do a really, really good job. And you know, I don't count the hours either too much. But, you know, we spend a lot of time on stuff. You know, I don't just sort of crash things through. And I think, you know, I've always regarded this as part art and part technology. You know, people spend a lot of time mixing records. They put a lot of effort into it, and I don't want to mess it up. So I don't want them to get a project which is inferior to what they came in the door. It's got to be better. And so I suppose we do spend a little bit more time on stuff, but the kind of projects that we get that come here are, well, they're just interesting projects. They're interesting music. They're interesting from all sorts of reasons, and they can be complex too. And I think, and my background with analog and obviously helps, so I can look at tape boxes and go, oh, I know what that is. You know, that was recorded on that kind of machine, and I've got one of those. And so I can kind of, and also the surround thing has always fascinated me, because I find this phrase immersive has become quite fashionable recently, but it is an immersive experience, and it's a great listening experience to listen to some of these recordings that we know well, having been remixed in surround-ish type way. And, you know, it's absolutely fantastic listening to stuff that works well in surround, and you can really hear all the instruments really clearly, and you're not fighting for space like you are with stereo, and you can really listen to the kind of basic elements of the recordings and hear how some of these recordings were really put together. So that's been really interesting, but I think generally, you know, yeah. You know, I don't just do one version of a track. I'll do a couple of versions, and I'll see how they all translate down to 16-bit, and we'll do a number of tests, and then I generally send my clients a couple of versions of, you know, mastered material, and let them decide and give them some pointers and say, this is how it is. This is one I like. This is one we like here. You know, up to you guys. You know, you tell us what's your favorite. So those are. I think people have fun, and it's an interesting experience. It's not just, you know, send me some tracks and I'll master it and send it back to you.